My name's Jeremy. I'm a student at the School of Nursing at the University of Pittsburgh. Today, myself and some of my colleagues are going to show you how to administer an IV.
First, we're going to start with IV bags. This is a big IV bag. It would usually be considered the primary IV bag.
This is a small IV bag. This would usually be the secondary IV bag.
We're going to talk more about primary and secondary bags further on in the video.
You're going to pick your IV bag based on your order. Okay, and you'll be able to read what type of IV it is through its outer package.
You will, of course, have to follow the 5 rights and 3 checks of any time administering the medication.
The first thing you do is open the outer package, and the manufacturer will give you some tabs on the outside to ease the opening.
Okay, the small bags also open the same way, and once you take the IV bag out of the package, it's good for 24 hours.
Now that you've chosen the correct bag, you need to attach tubing to it to connect it to the patient's IV. There's lots of different types of tubing available, and your institution will determine which types it wishes to use.
Regardless of the type, they all pretty much work in the same way.
One of the most important things on the packaging of tubing is the drip factor. This tubing has a drip factor of 10. When you read it, you'll see that it says 10 drops per milliliter. This bag doesn't say explicitly, but it's trying to tell you that it has a drop rate of 20 drops per milliliter.
First thing we're going to talk about is how to put the tubing into the IV bag, whatever kind of tubing you have. These 2 things down here are called ports. This one over here on my right is for injecting medications, and we're going to briefly tell you about that today. If you wanted to inject this blue medication into this bag, you would first wipe off this end with an alcohol pad for 15 seconds. And I'm going to inject it straight in to the end. And then you would insert the medication into the IV bag. I'm out the back. And whoops, look what happened. This is what happens whenever you don't go straight in. Due to the puncture in the other bag, I went ahead and got a new IV bag, and I'm going to demonstrate again how to inject this medication into the IV bag. First, I'm going to wipe the end for 15 seconds. Okay. Now this time I'm going to carefully inject this into the bag and be sure that I go in straight this time.
And this port is where we insert our tubing. And there is a protective covering on it to keep it sterile, and to remove it, you just pull it straight off. Okay, the parts that you want to keep sterile are, of course, the inside of this port.
Alright, now you open the tubing, whatever kind it is. tubing from the bag. And the tubing comes with sterile caps on all the surfaces that need to be kept sterile, so you don't need to worry about that. All right, and take it apart if the tubing has a a paper band on it. All right, and look at the tubing and decide, based on what you know, what parts you would need to keep sterile.
The parts that you need to keep sterile are the parts that go into the IV bag and the parts that go into the patient, so both ends.
This end of the tubing that has this contraption on the end of it is called the drip chamber. It's going to be attached to the bag. When you take the cap off of this end, you'll see that it's sharp. It now has to be kept sterile. The reason that end is sharp is so that you can insert it into here and break a diaphragm inside of this port. You'll see, even if I squeeze this, fluid won't come out of this port because of the diaphragm. You get your tubing into your bag one of two ways. The first way, you can have the bag with the ports facing up and insert the tubing inward or downward into it. The other way that you can get your tubing into your bag is by putting it up first. And then taking your tubing, making sure not to touch the sharp part, and inserting it into the port after you've straightened it out. Like that. You'll find when you do that, it starts dripping immediately.
To prevent a mess, like it's making right now onto the floor, it's a good idea to close the clamp before you even insert the IV into the bag. It's just a roller clamp. Whenever you roll it down, it closes. And when you roll it up, it opens.
So rather than having your slide clamp all the way down at the bottom here, it's best that you move it up to the top so you can work with it. So you just open it up and slide it up your tubing. And then keep it closed. Now that you've seen the different things that could go wrong, let's practice the best way to put the tubing into your IV bag. So first we'll open it. Can't get it open. Okay. We'll slide everything up to the top towards the drip chamber. Okay. Make sure that you close your clamp so that you don't make a mess. Right. And the easiest way to insert your tubing is to hang your bag first. Okay. And then checking again to make sure that your tubing is closed. Remove the cap. And we'll insert it into our port.
Once the diaphragm is punctured, the bag will leak. All right, so now you have your tubing hooked up. What you're going to do now is you're going to squeeze the drip chamber to draw some liquid into the drip chamber. You can see that the diaphragm's broken because we can pull liquid out of the bag and into the drip chamber.
Your drip chamber is used to see if your IV is running or not. This IV is not running because there are no drips. When I adjust the roller clamp, it will begin to drip, like now. So there are no drips dripping in this drip chamber because the IV is not running. But when I turn the roller clamp to turn the IV on, you can clearly see that the drips are now dripping.
The next thing we need to do is prime the tubing.
Priming the tubing is for taking the air out of the tube and replacing it with the fluid from the bag. We need to get rid of the air in the tube. If we don't do that, then all that air that is trapped in here is going to be put into the patient, and that would probably kill him.
What we're going to do is open the roller clamp and let the fluid slowly drip down into the tubing, displacing the air out of the tube. You want to get all of the air out of the tubing, so you want to prime it until the fluid comes out of the end, which may take a while. So I'm going to open the roller clamp to begin the drip process and take off the end cap, which is going to happen very quickly. So once you get the tube primed, you might want to try to sneak the cap back on, but you definitely have to close the roller clamp.
Just let the fluid run until the bubbles are cleared. This is a little tiny air bubble that's stuck in the line. Little tiny air bubbles in your line are not going to hurt your patient, but it will make them nervous. Get rid of these air bubbles is by taking your fingers and snapping it.
The next thing you need to figure out is how to regulate your rate. The easiest way is to attach your IV to the pump and program the pump to let the IV run at 125 milliliters an hour. We're going to cover pumps a little bit later. But let's say that you don't have a pump. It does happen, not often, but we'll learn what to do if you don't have a pump.
So we're going to pretend that our pump is broken, so we have to figure out how to deliver 125 milliliters per hour. And we don't want to stand here for an hour trying to see if we're right or wrong, constantly adjusting our roller clamp. So we're going to use the drip factor that was written on our package to calculate our drips per minute instead of per hour. And you're going to learn how to do this in class. So our order is 125 milliliters an hour, and our drip factor for this tubing is 10 drops per milliliter. So from doing our calculation, we know that we want 21 drops a minute. If we have 21 drops per minute, we'll know that we'll have 125 milliliters infused into our patient after 1 hour. So what we're going to do now is adjust our roller clamp such that 21 drops fall in 1 minute. Clearly this is way too fast. And clearly this is too slow. So you can make this easier on yourself. If you need 21 drops in a minute, try doing 10 drops in 30 seconds, or even 5 drops in 15 seconds. And that's exactly what you're going to do, is hold your watch up and count, waiting for 5 drops in 15 seconds. No, that's too fast. And that's 5 drops in 15 seconds. And just so you know, IV fluid is typically not blue or green. We just made it that color so you could see it better on the video.